everyone. I want to take some time in this video to go over the handout that is the sample APA essay. So, right underneath this video, you're going to see a blue link that says handout : sample APA essay. When you're ready, pause this video and then click on that link. That link is to a Word document. So when you click on it, and then you'll eventually get Microsoft Word opened up and you'll see the essay there in Microsoft Word. Then you can come back to this video and press play again, and then click on Microsoft Word to look at the essay while you're listening to the video, right? That way you're not having to continually pause the video and look at the essay and then come back to the video, that sort of thing. You can look at the essay and listen to the video. Okay? So, go ahead and do that. And we're going to look at all of those elements that I mentioned in the first video on basic APA format. So we talked first about design elements. Okay? First thing was double spacing and font. So if you look at this document and you go through the essay, everything, and I mean everything, is in Calibri 11. The entire document from start to finish, every single section, including the title page, including the reference page, the entire thing is double spaced. You'll notice, if you're looking through the actual essay part, that there's no extra spaces either. There's no extra spaces between the title and the introductory paragraph. There's no extra spaces between the headings and the next paragraph. There's no extra spaces at all. You simply double space the whole thing, and that's it. That's all you got to do. This one is in Calibri 11, but remember you can also use Times New Roman in 12 point, and probably your instructors would also accept Arial in 12 point. So, you can see, very uniform. Double spaced throughout, nothing, no extra spaces, same font, style, and size all the way through. The only things that are special are the headings throughout the essay. Those do get put in bold, but that's it. There's no bigger fonts, smaller fonts, different styles. Nothing's italicized, nothing's in bold, nothing's underlined. You know, very few places will you see the bold. That's it. We also talked about the title page, right? So APA requires a title page with very specific information in very specific locations. So almost halfway down the page, almost halfway, little less than halfway down, is where you'll find the title information. There are 3 items that go in that section: the title of the essay, your name, and your school. It will probably only require 3 lines of text. This sample required 4 because the title was a little longer. It was like a 2-part title. Can medication cure obesity in children? A review of the literature. So both those lines of text are the title of this essay. Then the author's name, and then their school. That's the only information that goes there in the middle, the center of the title page. You'll see down at the bottom that there is an author's note. Okay? The author's note in like really big true research papers, the author's note is often used to give thanks to an organization that maybe provided grant money or something like that. In most academic settings, if in a regular class, you can use the author's note to say what class the essay is for. And for instance, this one says, this paper was prepared for Psychology 108, Section B, taught by Professor King. So you can, if you need to include that type of information with your essay, you would do it here down in the author's note, not up in the center with the title and your name and your school. Right? So that's all that goes on the title page, except for that running header at the top. But that running header shows up on every page. And what goes in the header? Over on the left-hand side, you have what's called a running head. And that is the title of your paper, or a shortened version of the title if yours happens to be really long. But it's the title of your paper in all caps. And if you scroll through, you'll see that that shows up on every single page up in the top left corner of the header. The title of the paper in all caps. In the right corner of the header are the page numbers. The title page is page 1, and it gets numbered with number 1. And notice that that's all that's there with the page number. You don't put your last name, you don't put anything else. It's just the page number in the right corner of the header. You scroll through and you'll see that the page number is in that same spot on every single page. To make that happen, you have to create the header. You do not want to type in your running head and your page number at the top of every page where the normal typing starts. You need to create a header in that top margin and type in your title in all caps, and then use the page number function to start the title page as page 1. Once you do that on the title page, Word will automatically create the header on every additional page of the document. A lot of students either don't realize that that's how it's supposed to be done, or they don't know how, and sometimes they'll just open up a Word document, and right where the cursor is for you to start typing, they'll type in their header and type in their page number. And they'll do that every time a new page begins. They'll type in the header and type in the page number. But what happens is if you go back and add something to a section or remove something from part of the essay, it throws the spacing of the pages off, and then what you typed in as your header and page number might show up at the bottom of the previous page now because you've moved things around or taken things out. If you do it as an actual header, you don't have to worry about that. You do it one time on the title page, and then Word takes care of it for you throughout the rest of the document. But that's what goes in the header. In the left corner, the title of your paper in all caps. In the right corner, the page numbers, starting with page 1 on the title page, right? We also mentioned that APA essays often require an abstract. The abstract appears on page 2 of the essay, and it gets the word abstract centered. Nothing special about the word though. It's not bold, it's not italicized, not underlined, just abstract centered. And then you come back out to the left margin, get it out of being centered, get it back into a line left, and then you type up the paragraph that summarizes what your essay is about. And in this case, this abstract lets us know what problem they're researching, what their topic is, what the typical response is to this issue, what exactly they're looking at in the paper, what kinds of sources they may have used, and then a brief glimpse of their results, what they concluded. So it's very technical, it's very efficient and direct and straight to the point, and it's just a paragraph, right? And that's all that goes on page 2 is just the abstract. So then you go to page 3, and this is where the essay starts. You'll see right at the top, underneath the header, is the title of the essay, Centered. Again, nothing special about the font, simply centered. Can medication cure obesity in children? A review of the literature. And then immediately the introductory paragraph starts. So you centered the title, and after the title you go back to align left, and comes out to the left margin. You hit tab to start your introductory paragraph. No extra space, right? And then you start the essay. You have your introductory paragraph, right? And if you are writing the type of essay that might require headings, then every time you're ready to start a new section, you give your heading. The first heading, the first section for this essay is on page 4. What are the implications of childhood obesity? So this is sort of like their background information, why it's worth looking at. And again, the heading, the only thing that's special about it is that it's in bold. So it's centered, same font size. The only thing special is that it's in bold. And then immediately after that, no extra space, you start the first paragraph of that section. All right, and you do that for as many sections as you have, so as many headings as you need, right? And that's pretty much it. If you have any tables or charts or anything like that, those will go in the appropriate place in the essay. You know, you can see on page 6 they have a table that's included here. You might need one of those, might not. Any images or graphs or anything like that, though. You can see there's really nothing set off special about those either. They're just placed where they need to go in the essay, and they move on immediately afterwards. And that is pretty much it for the essay itself, right? So remember, if you get down here to page 11, the concluding paragraph of this particular essay started at the bottom of page 10 and carried over to the top of page 11. And look at all that extra white space there underneath the end of the concluding paragraph. It stays blank. You go to page 12, and that is where the references page begins. So let's take a look at the reference. So references is centered, nothing else special about it. And immediately after the word references, you hit the enter button one time to come down to the next line. You get it out of center alignment, take it back to align left, and you start your first entry immediately. Notice that the references are the whole thing is double spaced, just like the rest of the essay. The page number and the header are still there. Look at how the entries appear to the eye. The first line of the entry, so let's look at the very first reference for Berkowitz. The very first line of text for that entry starts all the way out at the left margin. And they type in they start typing the entry in, and then it comes down to line 2, line 3, and line 4. But look at those lines, lines 2, 3, and 4 of that first entry. They don't come out directly underneath the word Berkowitz. They are indented. It's like the exact opposite of a paragraph. When you begin a paragraph, you hit the tab key, and it takes the cursor over 5 spaces. Then you start typing, and all the rest of the paragraph, the other lines, come back out to the left margin, right? With a reference entry, it's reversed. The first line comes all the way out to the left margin. All the subsequent lines are indented that 5 spaces. Then, when you get to the end of that entry, you hit the enter key one time, come down to the next line, and immediately start the next entry. So you can see how they're distinguished, right? How you tell them apart. I know that the first entry begins here with the word Berkowitz, and it goes through these 4 lines, and here on line 5, we've come back out to the left margin. I know this is the start of the next entry. So that hanging indent is very important. It helps the reader determine where one entry ends and the next entry begins. Okay? And it's opposite of a paragraph. Notice too how everything is listed in alphabetical order according to the first word of each entry. So Berkowitz, Carmona, Krister, Duenwald, Henry, Hiltz, Hoppen, McDuffel, right? So it's all alphabetized. In this particular essay, it looks like every source that they used had an author. That might not always be the case, though. Let's say, for instance, their very last reference entry, the Yanofsky SZ and Yanofsky JA 2002, Drug Therapy, Obesity from the New England Journal of Medicine. Let's say that they had found that source on a website, a credible and reputable website, but it didn't have an author with it. In that case, the entry will begin with the title of that article or the title of that section of the website. So in this case, this entry would start with drug therapy, obesity. And then the year of publication after that. And then everything else would pretty much go in the same order. But since we don't have an author, we put the title first. So that means that this entry would have started with drug therapy, D. So it would have gone all the way up under Krister in alphabetical order, right? So, alphabetized according to the first word of the entry. Typically that first word will be an author's last name. If you do not have an author for that source, though, it will probably be a title of some sort that starts the entry, and then you look at that first word to figure out where it goes in the list. And that's the references page. Now, we talked too about how APA format and all formats in general also tell us how to cite our sources in the body of the essay. So let's go back up into this essay. Let's go back up to page 3 where it begins. And let's see here. All right, in the very first paragraph, the introductory paragraph, we have a source that's quoted. In March 2004, U.S. Surgeon General Richard Carmona called attention to a health problem in the United States that, until recently, has been overlooked: childhood obesity. Carmona said that the astounding 15% child obesity rate constitutes an epidemic. Since the early 1980s, that rate has, quote, doubled in children and tripled in adolescents. So they took a direct quote from that source. But notice that there's nothing in parentheses right there. Well, the reason that they don't have to have anything in parentheses there is because they already told us the author's last name and the year of publication. In March 2004, U.S. Surgeon General Richard Carmona called attention, blah, blah, blah. So even though they don't have anything in parentheses, they did tell us which source the information came from. And if we go back to the reference list on page 12, you can see The very second entry is Carmona, RH, 2004, March 2nd, and they give the whole entry. Okay? So I wanted to just bring that to your attention first and foremost, because it is possible to use information from a source and not see the parentheses, not see the parenthetical citation. But if that's the case, then it better be because the author and the year have already been mentioned as they introduced the source information. Most of the time, we don't do that. We find other ways of incorporating the information into the paragraph. So, let's take a look at one of those examples, which is more common. So, let's look down towards the bottom of page 4. So we have their heading there, is medication effective at treating childhood obesity? The widening scope of the obesity problem has prompted medical professionals to rethink old conceptions of the disorder and its causes. As researchers Yanofsky and Yanofsky, 2002 in parentheses, have explained, obesity was once considered, quote, either a moral failing or evidence of underlying psychopathology. Alright, so now we do see something in parentheses as the source was being introduced, but this time it's only the year. The reason it's only the year is because they already mentioned the author's names, Yanofsky and Yanofsky. But they didn't mention the year as they introduced this source information, just the authors. So they had to still put the year in the parentheses. And if you go to the reference page on pages 12, you'll see, actually this one I think is on 13, yes, the last one, Yanofsky, 2002. So this is another example of how you might not see that full parenthetical citation, and the reason why. The author's names were already mentioned, so now we just needed to put the year in parentheses. So in our first example, the author of this essay, they introduced that first source. They told us the author's name and the year, so they didn't need to put anything in parentheses. The second example we looked at, they mentioned the author's names, but not the year, so they had to put the year in parentheses. And then if you look on page 9, the second full paragraph, so you have the heading, is medication the best solution? And then that paragraph, and in the second paragraph, in purely financial terms, the drug costs more than $3 a day on average. There in parentheses, Duenwald, 2004. So in this instance, they did not mention the author's name or the year, so they had to put both in the parentheses. And that's it. That's all it comes down to. Making sure that you give credit to your sources, and if you don't mention the author's name or the year that that source was published, if you don't mention that as you're talking about the information, then you have to put that in the parentheses. And that's it. The way it's connected, we've already kind of figured out, but I'll spell it out for you here. The first word of that reference entry is the author's last name, and that's what goes in the parentheses to begin with. Then the comma, then the year of publication. So thinking back to what I said earlier about if you don't have an author and the first word of the entry is the start of the title, for instance, remember we looked at that last entry, Yanofsky and Yanofsky. That entry, if that did not have an author, that entry would have started with drug therapy, obesity. So when they referred to that source, right? They used the author's names. But let's say it didn't have an author. Let's look back on page 4. As researchers Yanofsky and Yanofsky, the bottom of page 4, 2002, have explained, obesity was once considered, quote, either a moral failing or evidence of underlying psychopathology. Let's say that that was a source that didn't have an author. So they could have said, according to one study, obesity was once considered, quote, either a moral failing or evidence of underlying psychopathology. Then they gave the parenthetical citation. There's no author. So what would go in the parentheses is drug therapy, comma, 2002. Because that's what starts the reference entry. So what goes in the parentheses, the first part of the parentheses, corresponds directly to how the reference entry begins on the references page. It matches up. And that again is so if your reader is reading through your essay and you pull information from that source and they're like, oh, that sounds really interesting, I want to read that whole source for myself. They can go straight to your reference list and look for those words in parentheses and find that source quickly. And the year of publication in the parentheses, again, that just helps ensure that your reader knows you've used current and up-to-date information. But that first part of the parentheses corresponds directly to how the reference entry begins on your references page. Matches up. If it's not an author, it will probably be the title, and that's what goes in parentheses. If it's a really long title, you have to put the whole long title in the parentheses the first time you refer to that source. But then if you use that source again, you can just use like the first word or two. You don't have to type out the whole long title again, but you do the first time. So that is APA format. So we've gone through the whole essay. You've seen all the design elements, and you've seen how the treatment of sources works. I often tell students that the easiest way to make sure that you're doing the source part correctly is create the reference entry immediately. Even if you're creating it in a whole separate document, because let's say you're doing your research and you're finding your sources, and let's say you find 8 sources that you think you might use in your essay. In a separate document, create the reference entry for all 8 sources. Now, turns out you only ended up using 5, right? So you can just copy and paste those 5 into your references page once you've started typing the essay. But you've already got them over here, ready to use, and that means as you're typing the essay and you're pulling information from those sources, you already know what the first word of the entry is to put in the parentheses, and you already know exactly the year of publication to put that in the parentheses. So if you have the reference entry made already, even if it's over here off to the side, you can still refer to that in order to know what goes in the parentheses as you're typing the essay. It makes it so much easier. Because otherwise, you're having to search. You're having to look it up every time you pull information from that source. You're like, okay, I know I got this from this one article. Okay, what's the author's last name again? I gotta look. What was the year of publication again? I have to look. Or you run the risk of not even putting the citation in as you're typing, and then you have to spend time at the end going through the whole essay and figuring out, did I pull this information from a source, or was this my own original idea? And if it wasn't my own original idea, which source did it come from? And then you're having to figure out which source it was, and then put the citation in. If you have it all kind of off to the side and already created, it makes the job of citing your sources so much easier. Because you already have it there. You already know what the first word is and what the year of publication is. You know exactly what goes in the parentheses. Every time you use information from one of your sources, boom, there's the parentheses. And remember, you do that citation every time you use information from a source. Whether you have summarized a whole article, paraphrased 2 paragraphs, or used word for word direct quote. Every time you use something from a source, no matter how you use it, you give a citation, you give credit. And if you're not putting something in parentheses, it better be because you have already told us the author and the year of publication as you introduced the source information, just like our first example that we looked at with this essay. Failure to give credit to your sources is plagiarism, plain and simple. A lot of times that happens accidentally, but it's still the same result. And it can result in a lot of problems. It can result in failing grades, failing classes, getting kicked out of school. It can be a very serious thing. So setting yourself up for success in the beginning, it just not only makes it easier as you're writing, but it also ensures that you have covered your butt. And you can't be accused of using someone else's ideas or using someone else's words and not giving them credit for it. So keep track of your sources and create that reference entry right away. Go to one of those websites, plug in the information, get the reference entry, copy and paste it into a separate Word document. And then that way you can come back to it all the way through to give yourself the correct citation. And then you go through that list. Again, like I said, if you had 8 on it, but it turns out you only used 5 of them, you copy and paste those 5 into your references page. Make sure they're alphabetized and formatted the right way, right? But make sure that you only put the 5 you used on the reference page, because that's the last thing I'm going to leave you with here. You have to give credit to every source you use, no matter how you use it, right? So, every time you use information from a source in the essay, there better be a citation, and that source has to appear on the reference list. But it's true in reverse. Any source that is listed on the references page must be cited at least once in the essay. So if you started out with those 8 that you thought you might use, but you only ended up using information from 5 of them, do not copy and paste all 8 into your reference list. Only the 5 you truly used. Okay? That is APA format. We've seen it here in an essay right in front of us. You can come back and refer to this at any time. And there are a million other sample essays that you could look at to remind yourself what goes in the title page, what goes in the running header, how does the essay look, do I use extra spaces here, is there any special fonts I use? No. How does the reference page get formatted, right? But don't let it scare you, because it's really just about a checklist. Do I have a title page with the correct information in the right spot? Check. Do I have the running head with the correct information in the correct spot? Check. Have I double spaced the whole document in the correct font? Check. Right? Is my references page formatted correctly? Check. Is each entry formatted correctly? Check. Have I cited them correctly? And that just means in the parentheses, the first word of the reference entry, comma, year of publication. That's it. Okay? Don't let it intimidate you. It is not some beast It is not some mystery. You guys can do this. It's really just knowing where to go to find what you need. Alright? So we're going to keep working on elements of APA format and research in general. Right? If you have any questions, let me know.